you're doing is madness. Dumbledore, with or without you, I'll burn down their world. There's nothing you can do to stop me. Do you really intend to turn your back on your own kind? No. It was you who said we could reshape the world. It's what we said we'd do. Because I was in love with you.
The Secrets of Dumbledore, rated PG-13.
Hello, hello.
Dr. Goodwin.
Hi. We're back. More cinema, psychology and cinema. This time, it's The Secrets of Dumbledore, Fantastic Beasts, Secrets of Dumbledore. So, let me just do, first, we're going to have a lot of spoilers, right? We gotta throw that out there. The plot is very simple, really. Grindelwald, the villain of this series, is hatching a plot that basically is a magical election rigging plot.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty much it. And it's up to Dumbledore and his team to stop Grindelwald from doing that so that he's not elected the supreme leader of the magical world.
Yes.
And that's pretty much it.
Really enthusiastic about it.
No. Well, I do. This is another one I have mixed feelings about, and they're even more mixed than they were for Doctor Strange in some ways.
Yeah.
Mainly because the Harry Potter series is one I really, really like a lot. So this new series, for whatever reason, it just doesn't seem to be landing with people like it did before, myself included. I enjoy them; they're fun, but there's a sense of, just not quite there. So, of course, that gets the wheels turning, and because I'm very curious about what is it? What's different about this series that's just not connecting with folks like the original series? What did it do better than this one? So, my thoughts in general are that it has its moments. This movie has its moments. The plot is quite a bit less convoluted and meandering than the last two movies were. But in some ways, they went too far with that. And it's just so simple and so straightforward. You could have been a little bit more meandering, But we'll get into that later. The great performances are great. You got a lot of great actors working on this project. And the characters are fun for the most part. I do like Newt, and I like the guy that plays Jake Kowalski. He's a fun character. I think he's kind of a perennial favorite for fans. Strangely enough, Tina is not in this one very much, except like for 2 minutes at the end. I'm not real sure what happened there. And then the Queenie character, who was pretty interesting in the last movie and the one before it, here it seems like they're giving her a redemption arc. And again, they seem to be letting her off the hook awfully easy, kind of like they did with Wanda. So I don't know what's going on there. Maybe it's female wizards that have a pass for, doing bad things, or maybe something like that. But before I get too far into it, what are your thoughts of this movie and the series as a whole?
I enjoyed this one more than I did the last one. I thought, what was it? The Crimes of Grindelwald.
Crimes of Grindelwald. Yeah.
It's a common critique, I guess, with both Multiverse of Madness and this. Like visually, like movies now visually are just phenomenal, right? There are some that really kind of use and abuse CGI, but I thought that the series is pretty well done. I feel like the creators are somewhat neurotic. They don't know where to go.
Yeah.
It's like, do we focus on the Fantastic Beasts or do we focus on Dumbledore and like all this? And if they really just chose a path and they really kind of just stuck with it, I think it would be a whole less convoluted, because meandering, like it's very drawn out.
The first two movies were, I think, more meandering than this one. Yeah, which is as straightforward. But at the same time, I actually kind of appreciated the whimsical sort of meandering nature of the previous two. I like this one for different reasons. I felt like it was easier to follow and easier to understand the stakes and all that sort of stuff. But in general, it just definitely doesn't seem to have the same magic that Harry Potter did.
No.
And I don't think it's just nostalgia. I don't think it's we just look fondly at the older movies. I think there's much better reasons that we can actually elucidate as to why it seems like these aren't as good and they're not engaging audiences as much. And the studio, I think, is having trouble reining it all in. And I think you're onto something when you're talking about how it seems like they're all over the place with the story. Like, where do they want to go with this? They don't just want to have a whimsical story about fantastical beasts, or do they want to have this kind of dark plot about the overthrow of this evil wizard who's trying to kill all the muggles and all that sort of stuff? And it doesn't seem like they're really able to mesh those two together very easily. They seem like they're just jammed together. And my wonder is, did Rowling come out and say, hey, I got an idea, I've already written this book, or maybe they approached her and they said, let's do another Harry Potter movie because, dollars. Mm-hmm. And then she said, okay, I got this, but she had something else in mind and incorporated that stuff about Grindelwald in there because she had this backstory, apparently, which is sort of thrown out at the end of the first movie. Whereas the rest of it is kind of Newt and his carryings on with these weird creatures. And then with the second one, which got a lot of hate and a lot of rage on the interwebs, she really leaned into that whole business about Grindelwald. And the story just seemed to go all over the place. And they couldn't figure out it just seemed like it was very meandering and very overly complicated.
Right.
And I think it's been forever since that one came out, and it wasn't just the pandemic either. I think the studio came to her and said, hey, look, that one didn't work. It didn't make the money we wanted, and whatever. I think it actually did still pretty good money-wise. I haven't looked at that. And so and then there was the whole business about Johnny Depp. Now we're going to have to get into that.
Yeah.
And so they changed the actor, and I think they brought in Stephen Kloves, who had helped her write the screenplay for the previous movie adaptations. And then that caused them to really zero in a whole lot more on the plot of Grindelwald's plot and how to stop it. And the magical beasts stuff got sidelined.
Mm-hmm. Well, look at the titles for each three. Fantastic Beasts gets smaller and smaller and smaller.
Oh, really?
With this one, you can literally hardly see it in the title screen, right? So
that's funny.
I think they kind of were just like, where are we going with this? Personally, if they fully embraced, this kind of pre-World War I or like this Wizarding World War theme that they have going on, I'd actually really enjoy that. I feel like if they just focused on a lane and stuck with it, and really drew out the characters, it would have been, or it would be a lot more fun for audiences.
So I'm going to list off a couple of my gripes with this film and the other two. But this one in particular, I'm going to focus on this one. And then I want to get into more in-depth analysis of not only the magic system, which we really started talking a lot about with the Doctor Strange video. Yep. And then, of course, there's a whole lot of plot elements that are different here than they were in the Harry Potter series, and it makes a big difference. So my first complaint is the villain. Whatever you want to say about Crimes of Grindelwald, I really bought Grindelwald in that film because mainly because of Johnny Depp. I mean, there's really not a whole lot to this villain, but Johnny never does anything halfway, right? And a lot of times he goes completely nuts and gives a really weird performance, just off the wall. But he swings for the fences, right? I have a lot of respect for that. He's a go big or go home guy, right? And here I felt like he really nailed the menace that this character was supposed to embody. Not that he had a whole lot to work with as far as the screenplay goes, I don't think. But that uncoupled with his bizarre appearance, and just the way that he was very, very quietly, very menacing and but always very calm. And he kind of almost hypnotized people he talked to with the lilt of his voice and all that, right? Well, you would know more about that than me, about the hypnosis side. And then they scrapped him, right? Because this whole business about him and his ex-wife. He got fired, I think probably unfairly, having been watching a lot of the proceedings, following that. But whatever. And replaced him with Mads Mikkelsen. Now, Mads Mikkelsen's a great actor. Yeah. I've seen him in some really good stuff. But I just feel like he didn't, and it could be the script. I don't think it's really him, because I've seen him in roles where he can exude menace. He can do all that stuff. But I just didn't buy him here as a real threat. He just seemed like, part of it's the change in the appearance too. Why did they do that? I have no idea.
So, all right. So, and this might be a little bit outlandish, but this is where my mind went when I was thinking about Dumbledore and Grindelwald, right? Mm-hmm. Rowling, a phenomenal author, right? I love her books. I love the films, all of it. But she appropriates a lot from other fantasy material. And where Dumbledore was the Harry Potter Gandalf, and I would say Voldemort was Sauron, Grindelwald is almost like the Saruman. And I feel like the relationship between him and Dumbledore really, it was a romantic relationship between Saruman and Gandalf in a way. Mm-hmm. Because these are it's two men who very much were wanting to change the world, right? Yeah. I thought a lot of people critiqued, his appearance, Johnny Depp's appearance in the first two. Well, in the end of the first one, and then the entirety of. Yeah.
I like that. I thought
I liked it, but I thought what they could do justice with that is showing how corrupt he became, right? How his appearance morphed and changed. So using some form of flashback scenes between him and Dumbledore, and him progressively becoming more and more just malevolent, and all that. So I thought really they could have done a whole lot with that while using kind of the Saruman and Gandalf trope,
Right.
So that's one thing. But yeah, no, I thought that I thought Depp, Johnny Depp was kind of done a disservice. By both Warner Brothers and Disney. But his performance was probably the one thing I enjoyed out of the second one, because he was menacing. He did have this kind of archetypal villain.
He was magnetic in an unsettling way, which I thought was perfect for the character that she was going for, that Rowling was trying to describe.
Well, in the way he used his voice, again, it reminded me of like Saruman when he's talking down. I'm not going to bring up Lord of the Rings for the rest of this conversation.
Liar.
But he when Saruman was like trying to kind of entice, he would hypnotize people, and he would use his voice. It was his calm voice, and Depp really he knew how to do that.
Yeah,
and it was really cool to see. Mads Mikkelsen, great actor. I completely agree. I thought he probably was one of the better parts of the third film. But it wasn't nearly as there was something missing. There was something missing there.
Yeah, I felt like it was something missing. They may have tried the albino and the different colored eye on him and the white hair, and it just didn't work for whatever reason.
Well, he did have the different color eye.
Did have the okay. Now you mentioned flashbacks. They did show in the second one him as a young man, and he still looked the same.
Yeah.
Right. So what you're talking about is make him look different then, and now he looks this way because he's been corrupted, or something like that. Yeah, that would have been a nice visual way of showing that.
Yeah.
kind of like the Emperor, you know,
Yeah.
in Star Wars,
Yep.
right? So we're not going to talk Lord of the Rings. We'll bring Star Wars into it.
Power!
Unlimited power. But here I got this standard stock movie villain vibe from Grindelwald. I'm scheming to take over the world through this overly contrived and kind of ridiculous plot that seemed like it was fairly easy for the good guys to undermine.
Yeah.
You know, what is this? Why are you laughing?
I'm just thinking about, you know, like the way we choose our leaders is if this magical deer has a baby and then it has to bow to you, and you know, we can get into that. Yeah.
That really strained credulity there, even in a world with all this magic. And I thought, okay, all right. This, you know, I would have preferred them to have established that a little bit more rather than just say, oh, okay, this is how we choose a leader. This magical creature bows. Okay. Yeah. And nobody ever thought that it would be only so easy to fake the whole thing with magic. I mean, they're wizards. They should know better, right? And the thing that's part of this is kind of annoying is that I feel like Rowling really thought this stuff through in the previous series. There was always places, you know, like, well, why didn't they use Veritas serum on people, you know? And she even went through the time and the trouble to explain why they didn't do that, because well, they can still be faked and all that kind of thing. We're like, okay, that makes sense. And here it doesn't seem like she put as much into it. I don't, maybe she did. I don't know, but there's deeper problems here, I think, with this series. As fun as they are, and I don't want to say I hate them. I don't.
Yeah.
I've watched the second one. The first and the second one I've seen a couple of times, and they're fun. They're fun, but they don't capture the same sort of magic, and that's what's got me wondering. So just talking about speaking of magic, I'll just briefly go over the hard and soft magic stuff that we talked about last time, right? So the soft systems of magic are more mystical. They embody mystery and wonder, and that's why they're fun to include in stories, in fantasy stories. Hard systems have clear-cut rules of what you can do and what you can't do with magic, and so you can use that to create interesting plot puzzles and dilemmas. And I mean, even Brandon Sanderson, I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he's got a whole series of videos. He's a fantasy author. He's written a bunch of Mistborn and the Stormlight Archive and a bunch of stuff like that. And he also has an online presence as like a storytelling guru, right? So he gives his ways of handling this, and he's definitely more of a hard system kind of guy. And he says the reason why there's good to do that is because you can then create solutions that the characters will figure out how to do later that are surprising to the reader, and so it's fun. But you've set the stage, depending on what system you use, for a puzzly sort of plot versus a awe and wonder and mystery kind of plot, depending on which type of magic your system is. And like we said last time, we got Lord of the Rings versus Harry Potter, right? Soft magic versus hard magic. The thing that's really interesting about these two series is they both have a hard magic system, but it works in Harry Potter, and in this series, it works less well. Yeah. For me, and I think for a lot of folks, if they were really to look at it, when random weird stuff happens and you have a hard magic system, you have to justify it because you've already established that there's rules. You can get away with loosey-goosey stuff, random weird stuff happening in a soft magic system by appealing to the mystery and the awe and the wonder. Now, there's a limit to that, of course, but so when in-rule magic happens, the downside of a hard magic system is that once the rules are established, then it becomes predictable and it sort of becomes mundane. It's no longer as magical. See, so that's the downside. You got to figure out how to fix that, or how to at least mitigate that to some degree in your story if you're going to tell it. Now, the Harry Potter series, I think, fixed this or addressed it by showing us this world through the eyes of Harry Potter, who was a child, who had never seen anything about this, thought he was a muggle, And so there's the awe and the wonder and the mystery is the unfolding of all of this stuff before us as he engages the wizarding world. Contrast that with the Fantastic Beasts series.
Oh.
When we meet Newt, he's already established wizard. He's already very powerful and very knowledgeable, and he just does stuff, and it's magical, and to him it's mundane, right? That would make sense. It would be mundane to somebody like this. But then we're seeing the story through his eyes, so it's mundane to us too. That should not be the case. Magic. So it seems like they tried to mitigate this somewhat by having the Jake Kowalski character in there.
Yeah.
They tried that, and so we do see a lot of this stuff through his eyes, and it gets some of the magical and mystery stuff because we can put ourselves in his shoes and go, yeah, like that would suck to be that guy trying to figure out what in the world's going on, right? And that works to a degree, but nowhere near to the level that it does in Harry Potter. So it's a fundamental plot structure problem that Rowling had already fixed and sorted out ahead of time, whether she meant to or not, through telling the story through the eyes of a child, being a young a YA author at that time. It was already kind of set up for her in advance. But the Fantastic Beasts seems more aimed at adults.
Yeah.
So it's going to be tougher for that reason. And I'm not sure that she had worked that out all entirely. Of course, the other thing is in Harry Potter, you're seeing all this through the eyes of a child. So you're naturally going to have more wonder and mystery anyway. I mean, this is one of the key strengths to the Stranger Things series is that they follow the kids at their level the whole time. Yeah. At least in the early seasons they do. And it really works because they act like kids would act, right? They're not, small adults. Like in some movies they do that and that screws it up. Instead, they take it all at face value and they're worried about the Demogorgon and they consult books on D&D to try to figure out how to, all this stuff. That's exactly what a kid would do. And I can tell you, I know that for a fact because I was their age in the 80s when that show was set, and that's how I thought. So by gosh, I was there. So what are your thoughts about that? Just as I'm sort of chewing on that magic business.
The magic in Harry Potter went from being very childlike into adulthood, right? Throughout the entirety. The aesthetic of the first two is nothing like the aesthetic and kind of the cinematography.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
And you're on that journey with these characters, and really there's this kind of that resonant, kind of story, and it builds up over time. And you're when you're reading the books and in the films, more so in the books, you're kind of wondering, you're left to wonder where all this is going. You're left to wonder, and it builds up, the Horcrux, it builds up the Deathly Hallows, all of it.
Yeah.
It's
progressively darker and more serious.
Right.
But you've grown into it at that point.
Yeah. Yeah.
And because the Harry Potter as a whole, and we haven't really dug deep into Harry Potter here on the channel, but the Harry Potter series is about growth and development into adulthood.
Yeah.
Voldemort is a shadow character. He's the inverse of Harry Potter himself, and the symbolism is almost on the nose with the last couple of movies of that, and it's really Harry versus Harry. It's not really, Voldemort's just stand in for the dark side of Harry himself.
Right.
So we could get into all that, but the series is very resonant because it follows that path, and you go from the biggest thing I'm worrying about is whether or not I can lift a feather with my wand to I've got to save the world from this guy who wants to wipe out Hogwarts. Right.
Yeah.
At least I've got to save Hogwarts from that guy, right? Who wants to take over the school. So.
Yeah. Well, you had that progression in the original films. And you just, I don't get that here. I get kind of scattered storytelling. I don't see that progression. Like at the end of this one, it didn't feel like this was the kind of, I know they originally were going to do 3 and then they expanded it to 5.
Right.
It didn't there's no finite endpoint. Like there's no overcoming it. Grindelwald's still out there. This is all still happening. right?
Yeah.
There's no, what battle has been won, really, you know? And
They kept him from taking over this time, but he'll be back.
right.
Right. Tune in next week, kids.
Yeah, and really, how many secrets of Dumbledore were there, right? I mean, you had okay, yes, he had this kind of blood oath with Grindelwald, and then you had Aberforth's son being Constance or Aurelius or whatever his name is.
Yeah.
But what other than that, you know, and they even could have done that better between the three films, building that up, and it really there was no.
Yeah, that seemed like they were making it up as they went.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, that was my least favorite part of the second movie at the very end when he says, "You're actually a Dumbledore." I'm like, where did they pull that out of?
If they had the Phoenix at the very beginning, like this little bird following him again, like it's like
if you're gonna have a payoff like that, you gotta set it up first.
Yeah, set it up. Like if you had again, if he's in New York and he's being abused by his witch-hating, you know, stepmother, but there's a little red bird that keeps on following him and it keeps on getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Oh, it's a Phoenix.
That would make sense.
Amazing.
Yep, that would have made a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So let's talk about plot for a second. I've alluded to this earlier, but in Fantastic Beasts, we follow, like I said, an accomplished wizard. He knows magic. Instead of Harry Potter, who is a wizard but doesn't know it, thinks that the Muggle world is the whole there is, finds out and discovers there's actually this magical world. We follow him into this magical world, and so we're just as in awe as he is. And he then slowly becomes more and more powerful. But that's not the point. The point is not to become the ultimate guy, right? This is not Dragon Ball Z. He's trying to get to the end and make it through, right? There's other characters more powerful than him, and there always will. It's okay. Now, but it ultimately ends up in defending the school from Voldemort.
Yeah.
Here we've got Newt. He's already accomplished. He's entering the Muggle world. So they flipped it. They flipped it around. It's the inverse plot structure. And it doesn't work as well because why would I want to enter the Muggle world? It's boring, right? The whole point of fantasy, right? I mean, Tolkien talked about this. He often said that fantasy, you know, it would be accused of being escapism, and he said, but shouldn't a prisoner try to escape? Right? It's things like that. And he always defended folk tales and fantasy narratives and all that. And he was extremely picky about what he felt like was good, but that's a different side. So the whimsical animal elements are the only kind of fun thing of wonder left from that. And they do try to, you know, milk that. And it is fun, like the Niffler and the big Chinese dragon looking thing and all that are really cool. But then they got, like we were saying earlier, they took those things and shoehorned them into this plot about Grindelwald, who's trying to, you know, become the next, you know, the previous Voldemort.
Yeah.
And he's trying to take over the world, which we already know he won't succeed at because we've seen the other movies. All right. So, but that's not a problem with prequels necessarily.
Yeah.
A lot of people, you know, would look at that and say, well, the Star Wars prequels had the same problem. Not really, because the question is different. The question is not, is Palpatine going to become the Emperor and take over the galaxy? That would be a dumb thing to focus on the prequels on. That we already know the answer to that question, so there's no reason to go into that. But there was an entirely different question that we were all wondering when the prequels first came out, which is, why did Vader fall to the dark side? Nobody knew the answer to that.
Yeah.
And that's really what is at stake here. The problem is they didn't have a question like that to base the theory or the series on, did they? No, they didn't have a question like that. We already knew that Grindelwald was some evil magic guy and he fought with Dumbledore. They previously were lovers or something, and that's that. But he didn't succeed.
Yeah.
And, you know, he must have died, apparently. So we're going to go back here and see that all happen, which we already know how it ends. Not a whole lot of narrative tension there, gang.
No.
They needed to ask some other question. related to the original series, I think, for it to work better. But Hollywood didn't come to me to ask, so
I think, well, yeah, they should have, right? But no, I think if they base it around the Elder Wand, right, and this kind of
Deathly Hallows themselves,
right? Why not? How did Dumbledore get all these? Was it through this through line? I mean, I think it was Deathly Hallows Part 1 or Part 2. Voldemort goes into Azkaban and he confronts Grindelwald and says, "Where's the wand?"
And, that's right.
And they could have done it. Again, there's so many ways they could have made this work, but if it's just we're going to tell this story for the sake of not only nostalgia value, like for the sake of really drawing out more of Dumbledore, I'm all for that. Like he's one of my favorite parts of the book.
He's definitely my favorite character in the whole series.
Yeah, right.
He's very interesting. He's mercurial. He's mysterious. He's got plots going within plots and all that stuff. And I don't see hardly any of that. There's a little bit of this here. And Jude Law, of course, is a great actor, but he downplays things. He's too restrained here.
Right. They really could have drawn it out. But then again, I mean, and if you look at this film in particular, out of the total 3 of this kind of prequel, it has the most musical references to the Harry Potter, and it might be because, I mean, they're at Hogwarts more often, but it has the more musical references to who was it that did the score? John Williams. John Williams, yeah. It has more references.
The man, the myth, the legend.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah.
And then also just little references scattered throughout in terms of things that are referenced to Hogwarts. I remember they're walking through the streets of this. It looks like this Tibetan city, right? This town, and they all have those briefcases, and one of them blows up, and it's those monster books. I forget what they're called.
Yeah. That was fun. I like that.
Yeah. So I think they're really trying to pull from the nostalgia value, but they don't have to. And just like our critique of Doctor Strange
and the MCU in general,
like it doesn't have to just be a visual spectacle. You have an audience that craves a real story, just like Harry Potter was I shouldn't say real story, a thorough, well told, just intricate and resonant story.
And the story has really got to come first above all else.
Yeah,
and I don't know why Hollywood does not know this.
Yeah,
you would think they would, but just throwing in lots of references to the other stuff isn't going to be enough.
Yeah,
people will love it if the story is already great, and if it's not, they're going to say that it's superficial,
right?
And they're going to complain about it. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the story for a second, right? What the hell is the story of the Fantastic Beasts? That's okay. So we'll throw that out there, but let's take a look. Let's take a look at Harry Potter, right? So you've got. Let's compare just the main characters, right? So presumably Newt Scamander is the main character of this, right?
Yep.
Okay. Yep. So Harry Potter, he's a kid. He's picked on. He's treated unfairly. He's treated like dirt. He doesn't know that he has no magic. Right? He seems to have no magic. And the most powerful evil wizard in the world wants to kill him.
Mm.
They tried to kill him, but failed, and we don't know why. That's very interesting.
Yep.
Let's compare then Harry to Newt, who is a quirky guy who likes animals.
Delivery, man. Quirky guy that likes animals.
I mean, that's what he is, you know, and he good. Now, I will say he grows on you. I really like the quirky, twitchy kind of performance, right? I like that.
Yeah.
But I mean, the actor can only do so much here. They need more to go on with that to make him an interesting character.
Yeah.
We need to have some kind of stakes, right? What does he want in life? Well, he wants his animals to not get hurt.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I mean, but Harry's facing way more than that.
Yeah.
So we're already automatically going to be more invested in Harry, not to mention that he's a kid too. So all of us, remember what it was like to be 11 years old and feel like the whole world was stacked against you, right? You're just automatically on his side.
Right.
With Newt, you just don't have that, right? You don't see that he's not up against anything like that at all. And he doesn't have to be a kid for this to work. Luke Skywalker's not a kid. And he wants to take out the whole empire, right? And the odds are way against him on that because he doesn't know anything. He's just a goofy kid, right? So I'm really on Harry's side right from the first paragraph of the book, or from the first couple of scenes in the movie. Whereas Newt, I'm just sort of meandering through this wizarding world and the Muggle world, and I'm kind of along for the ride. And I feel like it's just a movie that is there to explore the world some.
Yep.
And if they had just leaned into that, they might have worked. I don't know. I can't say for sure. I would think you would need more of a propulsive plot than that to really tell anything. But some people just enjoy that kind of meandering experience. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I mean, the original books and the original movies, again, like we were talking about, and like you were saying, it's you bring in that overall sense of just absolute wonder. Because for me, these were bedtime stories. These were books that my mother would read to my sister and I, when we were children.
Yeah, sure.
So it was like, oh my God, like this is amazing. What if I'm magical? What if I have these powers?
Yeah.
Within the first, I would say,
I wasn't that young when I read them, but
still, like even as an adult, it's still very much like, again, it's
you remember those feelings
that
you had when you were that age, sure.
And then
I do.
With Newt, he was disinterested from the get-go. Like he didn't want he literally just wanted to go to the United States to like free this Thunderbird and then leave. Like that was it. That was his main goal. And I agree. Like I like the kind of overly introverted, quirky, kind of wallflower who has this call to action, and has to utilize what he's good at in order for him to overcome whatever it is that needs to be overcome, but they don't play that up. They really don't bring that out. They kind of keep him where he's at. And there's honestly, there's no character evolution for the 3 films. There's nothing.
No, he doesn't change.
It doesn't change at all. And
you could say that he changes in the second one when he, like at the beginning, he's like, I don't want to take sides when he's talking to his brother.
Yeah.
And then when Lita Lestrange dies, who later became Catwoman, she all of a sudden now he's invested, right? Because it's Catwoman.
Right. Yeah. Well, and even that, again, they didn't play like that is a great point. Great point. I don't even remember that happening. Yeah, and I literally watched that movie again 2 days ago. Mm-hmm. Like they didn't bring it out.
Yeah.
Newt, I think they could have played up the character, but they were so afraid that if it was just a Fantastic Beasts and not Fantastic Beasts 1, Fantastic Beasts plus Dumbledore, and then Dumbledore, there's no evolution. He just became the founding member of the Order of the Phoenix, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so what you get is this kind of unsatisfying, kind of fun for 5 minutes, but ultimately not lasting experience of, oh, that's how that happened. Oh, that's where that started thing, you know? And they did complain. I remember when the prequels came out, Star Wars prequels came out. I guess for me, there really is only one set of prequels. But when they came out, a lot of the critics were complaining about that, but they stopped once the third one came out. Mm-hmm. Because it was clearly not about just Easter eggs and references. It was about its own story with its own tragic power to it. But anyway, so So now Grindelwald. Let's forget about the actors for a second and just look at the character himself. I feel like he is nowhere near as effective of a villain as Voldemort was for lots of reasons. I was on board with him when Johnny Depp was playing him in the second one because of the way he was acted. Really, he lulled me into the thinking, this is a really cool villain. But it was still with me. I want to know more about this guy. Yeah. Like, what does he really want? Like, what is the complexity here, if there is any? Right? Voldemort had complexity to him. he wanted immortality, and you could see why.
Yeah.
Because he grew up just like Harry Potter did, and he chose the dark path, and it led to a supreme power complex, and he just happened to be mentally sharp enough to be able to carry it off. And look where that, all the damage that was done, right? It's a great theme. It's a very powerful theme. And Harry could have done the same thing, but chose not to, and that's the great contrast. Here, he wants to take over the world and kill all the muggles because muggles suck. I don't know.
Yeah. No, you don't. That's the thing. Like Voldemort, he was a magical being in the muggle world, just like Harry was. And there was a lot of pain in his life. So he projected that like literally onto the entirety of his life. It says misery, like everything needs to be miserable. Everything needs to be controlled. It's all bleak. It's all suffering, blah, blah, blah. Right?
I was in pain, therefore everybody else is in pain.
Everybody.
He's kind of like the Riddler in that sense.
Yeah. Well, he resented Dumbledore so much because Dumbledore tried to love him as a surrogate father. Right.
Yeah. And he didn't want love. He wanted to dominate.
Exactly. With Grindelwald, it's like, all right, yeah, we get it. Like you're like Voldemort light, and you hate muggles as much as he does. You have this kind of totalitarian eugenics thing going on in terms of you need to cleanse the bloodlines, like just like Voldemort. But why it? And maybe Rowling's written about this, but it hasn't been kind of brought through in terms of the cinematic.
It's not in the movies. That's the problem.
And that's what matters, honestly.
Yes. And not only is it not in the movies, right? And it doesn't necessarily have to be in them. But if you're not going to tell us, then you need to give us hints that there is an answer forthcoming in future movies. Just the way they did with Snape. And they drew out his mysterious, like, is he a good guy or is he a bad guy business, right? Brilliantly done. But eventually, Voldemort evolved in the Harry Potter series into a character who became more complex through the flashbacks that we learned in with the pensieve scene. Initially, he was just a straightforward kind of Sauron kind of guy. But then and that is exactly how he would appear to Harry Potter as a small boy. But then as he gets older, he becomes more mature. Right. He realizes that people are more complex, and then Voldemort evolved with him. But there was always the sense in the background that there's more of a story here that we haven't gotten to yet, but I'm going to stay with me. We're going to get to it, right? That was what I felt like reading the books and watching the movies, that I knew we would get there, and we did. Here, I just feel like he's a bad guy, and they've already had so many opportunities to explain his motivation that they have not used. Yeah. They've had multiple chances, right? Dumbledore could have explained it to somebody. We could have seen scenes in flashbacks or through mirrors or whatever magical gizmo to see. That would have been cool to see exactly what their disagreement was about. Right. And why he decided, I'm just going to kill them all because they suck. There's a scene at the beginning of Secrets of Dumbledore. It's a great scene. It's full of tension. It's very well acted. Mads Mikkelsen and Jude Law are there. And there's just like laser beams of, and there's this push-pull, right? I know you used to love me, but now I hate you and all this kind of stuff. But then that was it, right? There was no more of that. I was, wait, I want more of that stuff. I want more of that to understand that dynamic there. It's really interesting. But it just sort of got dropped. Right. And I don't know if it's because they didn't have anything. That's what it feels like. Right. And or what? They allude to Dumbledore actually being in agreement with Grindelwald at some point. Yeah. I want to see that's something. Now that's I want to hear about. Yeah, right? I want to see Dumbledore like full on like prejudice against Muggles, but like and how he overcame that and how he changed his mind. Exactly. Why did he? Those are all great things to include in his story here. Yeah. Even in the Harry Potter in the seventh one, Aberforth says, he did a lot of things on his path to power that are a little sketchy. I'm paraphrasing. Yeah. And I've always wondered, well, what are those, right? And we've got 3 movies so far and haven't seen anything sketchy. He's just pure good guy Dumbledore. So we're seeing, actually, I think we're seeing the same kind of problem that we did with Doctor Strange. They didn't go far enough. They didn't go deep enough into the complexity of the character and show how maybe he did have thoughts. Maybe he agreed with Grindelwald for a while. And all they do is give us these vague allusions to that in this movie and in the previous ones, where he says, well, you used to agree with me. And then Dumbledore says something like, well, and then you just went off the deep end. Well, what does that mean?
Yeah, where was that line?
Yeah.
When was it crossed?
Why can't we see that? I want to see, show, don't tell. That's number one rule of storytelling. So, yeah. Voldemort has very clear motivations, and you can kind of low-key understand where he's coming from. If I had the power that he had, a good villain should make you ask that question.
Yeah.
If I had that kind of power, would I want to do that? I don't know. I would hope not, but you never know. There's a good villain, right?
Yeah.
Then you've got your hands on a good one. That's why Vader works so well as a villain.
Yeah.
Even in the original trilogy, before we saw all the stuff that led him to become Darth Vader, they had set it up so well that when he turns on the Emperor, you're cheering, right? I remember that in the theater when I first saw it. Everybody was like, "Yeah," going bonkers, right? I had chills, and all that. I was about 12 years old, I think, at the time, but so I was easily impressed. But still, that was a very memorable scene from the Return of the Jedi. And here he's a bad guy, and he just sort of wants to get rid of Muggles, and there's a lot of people that agree with him for some unknown reason. And it's like, I get that the setting and all that, we're making an allegory to Hitler, but we got to do more than just that. We've already seen that a million times, right? Yes, Hitler was a bad guy. Okay, who doesn't agree with that? Yeah. So it just didn't feel fleshed out. Like, I was hoping we'd get more of that and get more into, like, when the second movie came out and you really got to see Grindelwald in action and the way he was portrayed and everything. I'm like, I really want to know more about this guy. I thought he was the best part of that whole movie. But when he showed up, he was chewing the scenery every time he showed up, right? And that last scene where he blows on the pipe, right, and he's smoking some good herb or something or other. And he smokes, he breathes out and it creates the scene, and there's nuclear weapons and all that stuff. For a second there, you're like, yeah, I can understand why you'd want to eliminate those guys if that's what you see in the future.
Right.
Then and so they had a spark of that, but then they didn't go anywhere with it.
They didn't do it. Well, I mean, if they played up the kind of previous relationship between him and Dumbledore, and that
they had it right there in their hands. There.
And then you had this instance of kind of where the culture was at the time in terms of that acceptance of it. And it was a trauma, and Dumbledore took it one way, and then Grindelwald took it another way. That could have been a perfect opportunity to see where they diverged. But again, missed opportunity. I think, the more I think about this and the more I look at Harry Potter, and I think Rowling, her strength is in world building. She's really good at that. And I like the world building in this movie. It really expanded it even more, right? And I always wanted more of that in the originals, right? When the fourth book came out and I read about, there's actually other schools of magic out there, and they're doing the Triwizard Tournament. I was like, that's really cool. I want to learn more about that stuff, And then we really didn't learn a whole lot more about that, of the rest of the world, until this movie, right? But it's like, I don't know. It was cool, but you can't just do world building. You have to have a really compelling and propulsive plot for it to matter. And so all this other stuff going on about the election and everything else, it's like, okay, that's kind of cool, I guess. Yeah. Well, I
feel a bit more impressive than that.
Just like the characters needed to be drawn out, if you're going to incorporate a broader kind of view of the Wizarding world, look at, if the characters were at a certain point, you need to draw them out to see where they're at now. Yeah. The world becomes so, like, for me, I'm watching this, and maybe you can resonate with this, but for me, I'm watching this, and even though it is magical, and even though it's like expanding kind of your exposure to the world of the Wizarding world, it's so bleak, and it's like you can't really enjoy it because the story really doesn't kind of pull you in.
Yeah.
It's almost as if you're just like, oh, okay, that's cool. I would have loved to see more in terms of like the American schools of magic, all that stuff,
Yeah, and it's alluded to, like it's called Ilvermorny, but we don't know anything about it, and we never learn anything about it.
Right, and again, I feel like the election is dependent on this thing bowing to the future leader of our people. Again, it's just a shoehorn. It's to throw in the Fantastic Beasts element.
Yeah.
And that's the only thing that's kind of that through line there.
Yeah, it's kind of flimsy.
Weak. It's weak. You're all a bunch of magical people. You can't figure out a better way to elect an official. Like, what if? What? Like, I don't. It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense.
Well, and it could have. It could have with the proper setup, right? You have to recognize, I think, if you're telling a fantastical story and you're going to hinge your plot around that business of the animal, then, Mandy, you got to build it up beforehand, preferably 2 movies ago.
Yeah.
Right. And then, this mythical beast, this magical beast that never lies and always knows the true goodness in a person's soul. They talk about it here and there, maybe throw it in there, sprinkle it through the plot. Until this moment, it would have worked a lot more. But no, they came up with that at the beginning of the movie. We really didn't know anything about this animal until they explain it. And, talking heads tell us what's going on later, and that's I'm sorry.
I would have loved
not sufficient.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I would have loved something at maybe. I love those scenes in movies where you're watching, like, especially if it's like a trilogy or a saga, whatever it is. The earlier films, you see something and you're just like, what was that all about? And you don't know. You really don't know. You're not given that information.
Yeah.
But then it's drawn out and you're like, oh, that's what it was about. So then when you go back and you watch it again, you're like, that's awesome. Yeah. That's so cool.
Yeah.
But there's none of that here.
So I'll give you an example. When The Empire Strikes Back came out in 81, there's a scene in there where Luke flies away from Dagobah to go confront Vader, right? And Obi-Wan says, that boy's our last hope. And Yoda says, no, there's another. Everybody went bananas trying to figure out who he was talking. I mean, now it's a foregone conclusion. Everybody knows that it was Leia that he was talking about. But in that moment, right, for 3 long-ass years, we all had to beat our heads into a wall trying to figure out who it was, because he obviously had someone in mind at that point. Now, he may not have, right? So looking back on the whole process, Lucas made it more as he went along than it really seems like. He was good at retconning things and almost invisibly. Like the whole business about Leia being his sister, I think, was a later addition.
Kiss heard round the world.
Yes, exactly.
There definitely was a retcon there in terms of that. But even still, it's a sign of a good storyteller to leave you kind of as a viewer or as a reader. It draws you in and you want more, right? And I think you mentioned Tolkien, like he would talk about a rationality to storytelling. But when he talks about rationality, and I think I mentioned this before, he talks about it, it's emotion. He's not talking, it's like the story itself in the reason of it has to be that rational. It has to be rational in terms of that emotion.
He uses the term exactly the way Jung does.
Yeah.
As the feeling function is a rational function.
Yeah.
He doesn't oppose feeling and rationality, right? And Tolkien, I think, he was a feeling type, a very, very finely developed feeling type. That's why he's so judgy, right? Because they discern, right? This is slightly better, right? And they're very good at that. They're very good at that. And he produced, one of the greatest fantasy epics of all time. So who's to argue? But And he talks about the logic. I used to talk about the dream logic, right, of fantasy. It has a dream logic to it, right? I should still use that term. I like that.
Yeah.
But getting back to magic, right? So these are about magic, these stories, and I think magic, like we were talking about earlier, is a way to symbolize the will and the creative imagination in hard magic systems. That's what it really depicts, in my opinion.
Yeah.
The ability to use trickery and analysis and intellect to accomplish things in a way maybe nobody else has thought of before. A great way to depict that visually is magic. Wiggle, wiggle, poof. And that's just all smoke and mirrors, really. but the soft magic systems are different. Magic in those stories is more about a way to symbolize the great mystery of existence. Experiences of childlike wonder and whimsy, or even the divine, or in Jungian theory, the self archetype can have a magical or numinous, right? That's that kind of magic, the numinous that Jung talked about, or even the cosmic consciousness and some of those greater mysteries. So a soft system gets at those things. They're not mutually exclusive. You can have elements of both, I think, but you've got to do it skillfully. And Harry Potter does it skillfully because of the way we're introduced to it through the eyes of a child. And so when he's seeing all this magic, even though it's got rules and it's a hard system, we still get that mystery and that awe and wonder, and that I'm seeing a spark of the divine here, a great mystery of existence, because I'm a child and I'm seeing it. Right? I'm approaching it as a child. Like so many great religious and meditative traditions say, like Zen mind, beginner mind, right? Come to the world as a child would. And you'll see much further. So the soft magic system does that. It puts you in that frame of mind. So that's the strength of it. So Harry Potter, even though it's a hard system, it manages to import some of that stuff into it, and it really works. Fantastic Beasts has the same magic system, but it isn't mitigated by those other elements, those plot elements. That's why I think she's a great story world builder. She's a great world builder. But in a way, the reason the choice of plot that she picked did a lot of the work for her in Harry Potter. Picking the little kid who, right, kind of classic hero's journey business into the magical world. That did just a lot of the heavy lifting, and then a completely new story here with Newt and all that stuff kind of shows that the world by itself is not enough to get people really invested like they were.
Right.
So overall, I'd say my verdict. I don't really like ratings and numbers, but I know you'll probably give us one. I had fun with it. I like fantasy, so I'm pretty easy to please there. But I didn't find it anywhere near as gripping as Harry Potter. And it is what it is. It's not horrible. It's not, the worst movie ever made or any of that kind of silliness. It's not that bad, but it's not as good as it could be.
While you were talking, just quickly, the hard magic was everybody had a Patronus charm, right? The soft magic was everybody's was unique. Nobody knows why.
There you go.
So your imagination, right? It really kind of comes out. Why does the wand choose the wizard? What is the resonance there, right? But everybody gets a wand, but why, right?
And it's not always clear why.
Right. There is absolutely none of that, really. There's no why, right? There is. It is, but there's no why in Fantastic Beasts trilogy.
The way to incorporate that into this story, I think, given what she's given us to work with here, might have been something along the lines of that the magical beasts are, in a sense, more in tune with this deeper mystery of things like you mentioned, the wand choosing the wizard and all that. And so if you are attuned to them, you might, be able to accomplish great things, defeat the bad guy, or whatever it is.
They should have been the Ents of Fantastic Beasts. This world of mechanical wizardry and authoritarianism is coming forward, like a resurgence of nature coming through and saying, hey, no, there's this resonance, we need to do something. So magical beasts that haven't popped up before are popping up everywhere. Wow.
There you go.
Oh, there it is. There it is.
There you go. We just solved the plot problem.
We'll write our own fan fiction, and then we'll sell it to Warner Brothers and they can redo it. Hashtag release the Dr. Goodwin and Nick Iafredi cut.
Yes.
But I enjoyed this one more than I did the other two. I miss Johnny Depp. I'll give it like 5 sorting hats out of
Okay. But yeah, right. It's 5.5 dragon heartstrings.
Yes,
out of,
exactly.
or something like that.
Right.
Very good. Very good. All right. Well, yeah.
All right. Well, Dr. Goodwin, thank you as always for having me.
Okay, folks.
All right. I'll see you later, sir. Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.